to get the recording turned on anyway. So there we go. If I end up muting everybody, it's because I'm hearing a lot of background noise, but please, if you're muted, please feel free anytime you want to ask a question or add a comment, jump right on in. Once again, really well timed. We're looking tonight at the liturgies for Holy Week, which are coming up in practice soon, although they'll look a little different this year, probably still, but here they come. Let's start with page 256. And we did a little bit on this last time, but I'd just like to repeat either for people who weren't here, or I did also think of a few additional things I want to say. On page 256, we have this Sunday with two names, the Sunday of the Passion and Palm Sunday. This is the last Sunday of Lent, the Sunday before Easter, and the beginning of Holy Week. I think it's partly because of the unique liturgical features of this service that many people think of this day and the days that follow it as sort of a reenactment of the last days of Jesus' life. It's like a passion play or a movie. They expect the story to move in order, and they're thrown off a little bit when it doesn't necessarily unfold exactly that way. I'm going to read a quote from Ben Stewart, who is a professor of worship at the Lutheran School of Theology in Chicago. And he says this about Palm Sunday. The many Palm Sunday processions throughout history relate in some obvious ways to a specific piece of land in Palestine and to a once in history entrance of Christ into Jerusalem. But those many processions held over the centuries, with participants holding branches from the trees of their own lands, may also be understood as processions that relate to each local place and time. Christ has entered triumphantly into every place, in every assembly, in all times. There is an important difference between the liturgical celebration of God's saving power at work in history, a history in which we live, and the dramatic reenactment of long and faraway historical events. The point of the Palm Sunday procession is not that we close our eyes and imagine that our time and place have disappeared and we have gone to the holy city of Jerusalem back then, but that we open our eyes to see that the holy city and Jesus is here today. I would like us all to be thinking about all of this as we talk about all of the services as we come to them in this conversation. We're not reliving the past. We are not reenacting historical events in real time. We're putting on for ourselves and claiming for ourselves the underlying meaning of these events. So the primary name for Palm Sunday is the Sunday of the Passion, and the lectionary appoints for us a full reading of Christ's betrayal, arrest, torture, and death from either Matthew, Mark, or Luke on this Sunday. This is the only Sunday of the year that we hear this story in full. We get little snippets of it from time to time at other parts of the year, but it's the only Sunday we hear the whole story. We will read the story again from John's Passion later on in the week on Good Friday. We've talked before about how very differently each gospel tells the same story, and the Gospel of John tells it particularly differently from the other three. Most of us are really quite accustomed to this when we think about the Christmas story, even though we grew up participating in Christmas pageants where the shepherds and the wise men all show up at the manger at the same time. And in our nativity sets at home, all the figures are there at the same time. We really know that the shepherds only show up in Luke's telling of the story, and the wise men only show up in Matthew's. And we read both of those stories every year on different days. So we read the Luke story on Christmas Eve, and we read about the wise men on Epiphany. But even though we've experienced them together a lot, we all kind of know that they're both two different tellings of the story. So the synoptic accounts, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, of Jesus' passion focus on the humanity of Jesus and his suffering. They tell the story in a much more sorrowful way than the John Passion we'll hear later in the week. But the Sunday gathering celebrates the resurrection every Sunday. So Ben Stewart again says, the lengthy account is the apparent contradiction of everything celebrated in the entrance procession. Together, these two striking and contrasting liturgical events bear witness not only to the diversity of Christian liturgical traditions, but also to the tension at the heart of Christian theology. And if that tension weren't already striking enough, we proceed from the Passion reading into Holy Communion, that as always holds together Christ's death for us and Christ's life for us, feeding us with both. In the proper preface on the Sunday of the Passion, which comes as part of the celebration of communion, we hear the words, "You gather your people around the tree of the cross, transforming death into life." And that's what we hold together every Sunday, to remember Christ's death. Through Christ's death, we get new. So at the end of Palm Sunday, having brought the Passion story into our minds, we've set our focus at the beginning of the week. And at this point, we're now ready to receive the gifts the rest of the week is going to bring. And I take a drink of water after each day of the week. So we're now ready to look at what our book calls the 3 days, which sometimes people call by their Latin name, the Triduum, or to get even fancier, the Paschal Triduum, meaning Easter. Hello, new people. I'm letting one more in. Okay. Okay, we're all here. There's often confusion about what the term 3 days even means. Some people get confused because they think it probably has to do with Jesus saying in the Gospels that he will rise from the dead after 3 days. And they get particularly confused when in this liturgy, we celebrate the resurrection only 1 day after we observe Good Friday. So that's an important point at which to remember that we're not play acting anything in a literal sense. Some people confuse the 3 days with the 3 liturgies we're about to talk about in detail. 3 days honestly are 3 days. They're a 72-hour period that begins the evening of Maundy Thursday and lasts through the evening of Easter Sunday. They include the 3 liturgies we're about to talk about, but they also include other things. The Easter Sunday morning services are part of the 3 days. In some churches, it's a tradition to have a Vespers service on Easter evening, at which is read the story of the risen Jesus meeting the 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus. There are congregations here and there that say morning and evening prayer on every one of these days. That's more common in Episcopal churches than Lutheran churches. So we have 3 liturgies we're about to look at, but the 3 days can and do actually include a lot more. So we find ourselves now on page 258. And again, the red book you have in front of you just gives you what the editors decided you really needed to see in order to be able to participate. So there will be quite a lot of things along the road that I will flesh out in more detail. On Maundy Thursday, we meet at night around nightfall. I actually just exchanged an email with Rhoda earlier this week about how special it always feels to go to church at night and on a weekday. It's an unusual thing. It only happens a few times a year. It usually signifies something special. Under our current liturgical understanding, Lent is over now at this point, and these 3 days stand on their own as the beating heart of the Christian year. They're not part of Lent. They're really leading us to Easter. Most of us, I'll bet everyone in this room, grew up knowing Maundy Thursday only as a commemoration of Jesus' Last Supper with his disciples. And back in the days before Holy Communion was celebrated regularly, this was one of the only days in the year when Holy Communion did occur. And it's true, the institution of the Holy Communion is one very important aspect of this day. But the real key theme comes from the meaning of the word Maundy itself. So Maundy means commandment, and you can kind of see the same root word, Maundy, mandment. And so the real centerpiece of this day is the new commandment that is given in the gospel reading from John. And I'm going to read it for you just to remember. I give you a new commandment. Love one another just as I have loved you. You also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. This theme is symbolized in the optional washing of feet, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. In the picture here on page 258, you see both actions. The altar is set with the bread and wine for Holy Communion, and then the people are gathered around this bowl of water. Feet are being washed, and up above it, the life-giving cross shown kind of growing up out of the tree of life. Nearly every action on Maundy Thursday is optional, but they can be very powerful. Virtually the only truly necessary things on Maundy Thursday are the readings and Holy Communion. And since we've had pandemic, even Holy Communion has gone out the window. So we'll read and we'll hear reflections on the readings themselves this year. In a normal full celebration, just as we began Lent on Ash Wednesday with a longer than usual confession, we close Lent now with what can be a longer than usual absolution. So first, you can see there, we confess using very familiar words. And after that, our first optional ritual of the evening, people may be invited forward to receive an individual laying on of hands from the pastor. Laying on of hands is an ancient biblical practice that signifies the indwelling presence of the Holy Spirit passed on from one person to another. Laying on of hands is used at baptism, at affirmation of baptism, and at ordinations as well. Many people, I know, experience this individual expression of forgiveness with laying on of hands in a powerful way. After that, the service of the word continues. What, did I hear a comment almost? I'll keep going. The service of the word continues in the usual way. You can turn to page 260 if you wish. The readings for this service are the same every year and quite amazing, in my opinion. The first reading is from Exodus. It is God's instructions to the Israelites in preparing for the Passover. God is about to rescue them from slavery in Egypt. And even after their deliverance, the reading tells us they are to remember this day with a similar celebration forever. And that's honestly what we're doing too in the 3 days. Exodus does say, observing it as a perpetual ordinance. And we too are observing as a perpetual ordinance. This reading links us to what we're doing now because the Synoptic Gospels tell us that Jesus was celebrating the Passover at his Last Supper. I'm getting some background noise from somewhere. Yeah, I think that's better. Jesus was celebrating the Passover at his Last Supper. So it's here that we believe Jesus instituted the sacrament of Holy Communion. And Paul retells that story in his first letter to the Corinthians. And that's our second reading from Maundy Thursday. Side note, since the letters in the New Testament were in fact written before the Gospels, the writing down of the Last Supper in 1 Corinthians is the first time the Last Supper was ever written down. And then the Gospel reading from John. One of the cases where this story is told quite differently. In John, we're also getting a scene from Jesus' Last Supper, but in John, it is not the Passover meal. As John tells his story, Jesus dies on the day of preparation for the Passover, and symbolically, Jesus becomes the Passover lamb. So there's big theology there in John. And in John's telling of this particular story, there is no bread and wine. Instead, Jesus washes the feet of his disciples. And this humble servitude creates an illustration for the new commandment we talked about just a few minutes ago. I'm going to read it again. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Sermon, hymn of the day, and after the hymn of the day, we continue with our second optional ritual, which is a symbolic washing of feet. When this practice was first revived just a few decades ago, the pastor would wash the feet of a few selected members of the congregation. It was often 12 men to represent the disciples, while everyone else watched. It has proven to become much more meaningful if everyone is invited to participate, both as washer and as washee. This is definitely not everyone's cup of tea, and no one should ever feel like they have to do it. But I have seen people brought to tears by this experience, seeing a child washing the feet of an older person, seeing a confirmation mentor wash the feet of their mentee, and even on TV, seeing the Pope washing the feet of jail inmates in Rome. Really powerful. Joan, you have a hand up?
I hope that a lot of people have seen the scene with Mr. Rogers washing the feet of a character on his show who was not only Black, but I think he was gay. And it was a big moment in TV, very touching.
I had forgotten all about that, but I do remember that scene. Are they celebrating Maundy Thursday? It seems like an odd topic for Mr. Rogers. Yeah, just something Mr. Rogers decided to do.
As an ordained minister.
Yes, because Mr. Rogers was a Presbyterian minister. Dan is commenting, and he's answering a question I've always wondered. The German name for Maundy Thursday is Gründonnerstag, Green Thunder Day or Green Thursday. He never understands why the name is created. There's a wide disagreement about its origins. Interesting, eating green food. So, Mom, do you know the answer to this?
No, I don't.
Oh,
I have a question.
Spinach green Donnerstag. In Germany, you have to eat spinach.
have to eat spinach on this day.
Green
Do
Donnerstag.
you know why, Krista, you eat spinach?
No, it's green is green. So
Yeah.
as children, we were told on green Donnerstag, you have to eat your spinach.
I love it. Mom, what were you about to say?
I'm going to voice a disappointment. One of the beautiful songs is "A New Commandment I Give Unto You," and it's not in this book. Have you any idea why it got left out? Because it fits so perfectly with this particular day.
Yeah, I think it's in With One Voice, isn't it?
Yeah, it isn't With One Voice, but for some reason, and a lot of things in With One Voice are in this new book. Yeah, I've sung it out of With One Voice. I know it's there, and I thought it was in here, but it isn't.
I'm looking at it right now to see if I can see any good reason it's not. I think it was just one of those editorial decisions. Something has to go, and
Yeah,
I mean, the words are straight from the gospel, so there's nothing objectionable about it.
no.
Yeah.
Didn't catch the name, Tim.
The song is called A New Commandment.
Uh-huh.
So how appropriate is that? And it's
Yeah.
exact words from the Gospel of John.
And it's a lovely tune.
Yeah, it is a nice tune. So just like Rhoda suggested that we needed to sing softly and tenderly, you might have just suggested a song that we need to sing on Maundy Thursday. So since we print everything in the bulletin anyway, I can download anything, even if it's not in the book,
Mhm.
or I can download a lot of things. So this is a quote from Gail Ramshaw, who is a Lutheran lay theologian who's done a lot of writing about worship. This referring to foot washing, makes service not only an attitude in one's head, it is an action that extends all the way to our hands and our feet. Our entire body is pulled into and expresses our covenant within the body of Christ. Both food and the touch of neighbor enliven our bodies, and the flowing water reminds us of our baptism. That's it for foot washing. After the foot washing, Holy Communion is normally celebrated, and the same preface we heard on Passion Sunday is repeated. You gather your people around the tree of the cross, transforming death into life. I think it's always just so important that we don't ever just leave the cross as the cross. It's always transforming death into life. And it's especially important as we get into Good Friday in a minute. After communion, there is the third optional ritual for Maundy Thursday, which is the stripping of the altar. In preparation for Good Friday, everything is solemnly removed from the worship space. Sacramental vessels, linens, banners, books. I've even seen candles and chairs removed. The altar symbolically washed with a water and a sponge. Lights may be dimmed, and a psalm of mourning and distress is sung. Psalm 22 is customary, but Psalm 22 is also the appointed psalm for Good Friday. So sometimes people sing Psalm 88 instead. All in all, Maundy Thursday has been somewhat of a celebration, although maybe a quiet, thoughtful celebration. The big themes are this love of neighbor and forgiveness. Good Friday will be stark and somber, and this small celebration has prepared us for that. So if anyone would like to chat a little more about Gründonnerstag or Maundy Thursday, before we move on, now's a great time.
Hi, okay. I was going to say, I think Episcopalians do more of this foot washing, at least in my experience in Providence.
Yeah,
But it's quite a moving service.
I'm trying to remember if I had ever experienced foot washing before I worked for an Episcopal church. I did, but it was never an opportunity for everyone to participate. It was the pastor washes a few people's feet and everyone else watches.
Well, the ones I've gone to have been a special service on Maundy, Thursday in the evening, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that it was about 10 people. It wasn't, but then the turnout wasn't that large either.
Right. At the Episcopal church I worked at before I came here, it was a really beloved service. A lot of people came to it, and a lot of people did participate in the washing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How did they organize that?
They set up about 8 or 10 stations all around the room, and it takes quite a while, but if you set up enough stations, it can work.
And then they recruit ahead of time 10 people to do the washing, or how do they work it?
The people take turns, and it just happens sort of organically. A few people will kind of get it started, and then very often what'll happen, and again, it just happens organically, but the person who has just had their feet washed will stay there, and then the next person comes forward, and that person will wash the next person's feet, and they just kind of keep on taking turns that way. We've tried something similar a few times at Grace here, and not a lot of people do it. The kids love doing it. And Elizabeth's right there, and usually Elizabeth and a child are sitting there waiting, and people, maybe half a dozen people come forward, and it's actually quite nice. And we sing the whole time. Works well.
Is this a special service for the kids?
No, this is just the regular Maundy Thursday service.
I see, okay.
Has anyone here had your feet washed or done it for someone else?
I have. I like it very much.
As a wash.
Although I must say, everybody's always washed their feet ahead of time.
It doesn't matter. None of our feet are as dirty as the feet of Jesus' disciples were.
It's good to wear flip-flops on that day.
Years ago under Pastor Steve Cornelius, I think, once. It was interesting.
Yeah. So as I say, it can be a very meaningful experience. It's not super widely practiced. And even in churches where it is practiced, some people participate, some people don't.
I don't intend to again. Once is enough.
So Dale and I were talking about this morning, and he was Catholic for a few years. He wasn't raised Catholic. He became Catholic for a few years. Now he's not. But in the Catholic Church,
Yes, he is. He's a Lutheran.
Yeah, exactly. Roman Catholic. In the Roman Catholic Church, the priest will wash people's feet. And he said people sort of got a charge over watching the priest be subservient to the people. It was kind of entertaining in a way.
Tim, I just want to mention, because we're a small church at University Lutheran, we've had full meals on Monday, Thursday, where it's a ritualized meal where all the food is placed on the altar. And I wasn't sure I liked it. It was kind of odd. It's like, are we supposed to just eat in silence? Is this a somber thing? Is this a joyful thing? I think some people liked it, and maybe it's something you have to get used to.
Yeah, at the Episcopal Church I worked at in Southern California, one year, we brought in a liturgical consultant who was going to help us just completely reimagine all of this stuff. And one of his suggestions was that we should actually meet in the social hall and have a complete meal as part of the Maundy Thursday service. And when I heard about it, I thought, oh, I am not going to like this. It's going to be a disaster. And it was beautiful. It was really, really good.
Yeah.
I think I feel like they read something while we were eating.
Well, we had a Seder at Bethany in Menlo Park.
Yeah, and some
That
churches
was
do that.
also
There's a lot of discussion about whether Seders are appropriate or not appropriate. That it's a Jewish ritual. We aren't Jewish. We shouldn't co-opt other people's traditions. Then, as we also just said, in the various Gospels, the Last Supper is Passover, and in John, the Last Supper is not Passover. And then, to be really historical about it, Seders as they exist now didn't really exist yet at the time of Jesus. So we're not reenacting exactly what Jesus did. I have been to Seders, and I think they're lovely and fabulous. But I think it's really important. I think it's important to not connect the Seder directly with Maundy Thursday.
I had the good luck of being invited by my Jewish friends to their Seder every year.
Yeah, that's the best way to do it.
Right. Although I miss the bread.
All right, we're going to move on and talk next about Maundy Thursday, or about Good Friday. So I'll just point out that Maundy Thursday ends with no final blessing or dismissal. After this stripping of the altar, people just get up and go. And the reason for that is we really think of these 3 evenings as one service with little breaks in between. So we're in a continuation of a single unified liturgy. So we're on to Good Friday. In my observation, there is no other day of the year when worship planners scramble more to figure out something creative to do in worship. So there's a huge variety of practices. Some churches do something they call tenebrae, which involves snuffing out candles one by one, interspersed with readings and music. A true tenebrae is, in fact, a Holy Week service of morning prayer observed in monastic communities and centered around readings from the Book of Lamentations. So what people experience on Good Friday kind of gets ideas from tenebrae, but it's not really the same thing. Some churches have tre ore services, or 3-hour services held from noon to 3 o'clock, which are, we think, the hours that Jesus actually hung on the cross. Tre ores, because they're 3 hours long, typically have several sermons following several excerpts from the Passion accounts, each reading followed by another sermon. Some congregations structure their services around the 7 last words of Christ, which is a little problematic because you have to merge together the different gospel stories to come up with 7 words. And some congregations put together big musical extravaganzas for Good Friday. Weirdest of all in my mind is churches that perform requiem masses, which essentially create a Christian funeral service for Jesus. This Good Friday liturgy, as it's presented in our hymnal, attempts to recover an ancient practice that is very simple, very quiet, contemplative. In its simplicity, it has very limited music. There are a couple of hymns, there's a psalm. Sometimes the gospel itself is chanted, which is actually a holdover from times when every reading was chanted all the time. We've kind of preserved it for Good Friday. On Good Friday, we are not reenacting the death of Jesus. We are not giving him a funeral. Gail Ramshaw writes, again, English-speaking Christians call this day good. It is a day not of unmitigated mourning as if Jesus were dead, 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 but of profound contemplation of the mystery that from the cross of death, God grants the world new life. The waters of baptism flow from the cross, and our gathering is contained by Christ's crown of thorns. Held together in the passion of Christ, we hold out our hands in prayer for all the world. I have to think the person who made the illustration for Good Friday heard that quote or read that quote from Gail Ramshaw, because here are the people gathered together at the foot of the cross. The crown of thorns is all around them, and this stream, the river of the water of life, is coming down from the cross. As I mentioned just a second ago, this service is a continuation of what was begun in the Maundy Thursday liturgy. So there is no prelude, there is no hymn, there is not even a Lord be with you to get you going, just the prayer of the day. And then we start the readings. The readings for Good Friday, like Maundy Thursday, are the same every year. The first reading is from Isaiah 53, a poem that describes the suffering of a righteous person, and we have retroactively read Jesus into this passage. Psalm 22 is in the first person, so we speak or sing words of suffering as if they are our own. Verses from Psalm 22 were used by the gospel writers. In 2 of the 4 gospels, Jesus speaks the first verse from the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? All 4 of the gospels report that the soldiers cast lots for Jesus' clothing, which also is a verse in Psalm 22. In the last third, Psalm 22 turns from despair into praise. I will declare your name to my people. In the midst of the assembly, I will praise you. With 31 verses, the end of the psalm sometimes gets cut, but the last verse is actually kind of a little secret hint to Easter. The last verse is, they shall proclaim God's deliverance to a people yet unborn, saying to them, the Lord has acted. And if you're really paying attention on Easter Sunday, you'll hear the line in Psalm 118, on this day the Lord has acted. We will rejoice and be glad in it. So the Lord is acting both in what happens on Good Friday and in what happens on Easter Day.
And today.
Absolutely. So important, Lois. There are 2 options for the letter, from the letter to the Hebrews for the second reading. Both of those readings refer to Jesus as the great high priest who conducts the saving sacrifice. At the top of page 263, you can see the proper gospel acclamation, which is a quote also from the book of Hebrews. Look to Jesus, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. And that right there is really the key theme of Good Friday in a nutshell. Jesus is not dead. He has turned something awful into something good. By the cross, he has conquered death. Even on this day, he is more alive than ever. The Passion, according to John, as I said earlier, is always read. John's take on the Passion really focuses on the idea of victory over the cross. So unlike in the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus is totally in control of this situation. He's going to death willingly, it seems like unflinchingly. And if you've already heard one of the Synoptic Passions on Sunday, it's a great time to observe the differences in the way the story is told. Besides the reading of John's Passion, the other most distinctive thing about Good Friday is the bidding prayer. So an assisting minister reads a series of bids. Let us pray for blank. There's a little time of silence, and then the pastor prays a collect for what has been bid. This whole prayer is one of the many things that's not printed out in full for you in your book, but you can see a list of the topics. We pray for the church throughout the world, leaders in the church, those preparing for baptism, Christians in other churches. This is sort of then going through a series of people and their relationships to God. Christians in other churches, the Jewish people, first to hear the word of God. In earlier times, this was actually a prayer that the Jewish people would convert. The prayer is now modernized and basically regards the Jews as our sisters and brothers in faith. We pray for our family. The same thing, those who do not share our faith in God, the prayer used to pray for their conversion. Now it really prays for their well-being. And they are also our family and our neighbors.
When did that change?
I think with Vatican II, I'd have to go back and look at older Lutheran books, but it's been a good 50 years.
Okay.
But not as long as you might hope. And then same thing, those who do not believe in God. The prayer for God's creation, I think, is new for this book, but I think it's a good addition. Those who serve in public office and those in need. A prayer like this one is found in documents going all the way back to the 3rd century. The topics of the bids and some of the wording are among the most ancient liturgical texts still in use. And this bidding prayer is the model in concept for the prayers of intercession we pray every Sunday. It's quite a bit longer, but it's the same idea, a series of petitions praying for certain things that we care for. Page 264, we say the Lord's Prayer, and then the service can actually end right here after the Lord's Prayer. No blessing, no dismissal, done. And because the readings and the sermon and the prayers are all quite lengthy, that has probably already been an hour at church. Just to point out, in case you haven't already noticed, this is the one major service of the year at which there is no communion. In the Roman Catholic Church, it's the one day of the entire year that no Mass is said. It's a day of fasting in preparation for the Easter festival. So if you're leaving at this point, you go home and the liturgy will pick up tomorrow where it leaves off today. It is optional and traditional in many places to continue this service with a visible tactile action, which actually can be quite useful in a service that consists otherwise of a lot of words. A large wooden cross can be carried into the church, and 3 times is said, "Behold the life-giving cross on which was hung the Savior of the whole world. Oh, come, let us worship him." These 3 statements are echoed at the Easter Vigil when we bring in the Paschal candle and say 3 times the light of Christ. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we're going to get to it really soon. Once this large cross is set into place, people may be invited forward to make whatever sign of reverence they wish. The rubrics at the bottom of this page give us some suggestions. You can touch it, you can just stand before it for a moment in prayer. In some traditions, people actually kiss the cross. There's, I think it's in Egeria, this woman who wrote about observing liturgies back in Jerusalem in the 2nd century. People used to try to take a bite of the cross so they could bring some home with them. They'd lean in to kiss it and then nip off a little. So we don't do that anymore.
Was it made out of wood or candy?
That's a good question. There are two suggested texts that can be read or sung while people are performing this action. The first, "O my people, O my church," is sometimes called the Solemn Reproaches. This is a long medieval poem in which the voice of Christ accuses the church, meaning us, of our complicity in Jesus' death. Through most of this class, I've tried not to pass any value judgments on the book, whether I like it or I don't. I personally really don't like the Solemn Reproaches. They don't seem to fit in with the rest of this service, the theme of which has, even though it's been very somber and stark, the theme has been Christ's victory over death. And now it's sort of turning back into this accusation. I think the reproaches impose shame just 24 hours after we experience this huge outpouring of forgiveness and love on Maundy Thursday. The reproaches bring us right back into chains without even a word of forgiveness. So my value judgment, I don't like them.
Is this the Easter Vigil you're talking about?
No, I'm still at the end of Good Friday. This is while people are doing their kind of reverent action with the cross.
Yeah.
And then the other optional text does fit the service, I think. "We glory in your cross," which is Psalm 67, but it's given a unique refrain. "We glory in your cross, O Lord, and we praise your holy resurrection, for by your cross, joy has come into the world." I think it's better. Once everybody has had their chance to approach the cross, there is one final acclamation on page 265. "We adore you, O Christ, and we bless you. By your holy cross, you have redeemed the world." And then we sing a hymn that proclaims our confidence in Christ's triumph over the cross. The suggested ones right there are "Sing my tongue the glorious battle," or one of my favorites, "There in God's garden." Other hymns work too, but the point is we're not ending with blood and gore. We're ending with Christ's victory over the cross. And then once again, we leave without any blessing or dismissal. And we finished another day. Want to do questions or comments?
Well, John has a different order of events.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
That's why it's really so important that we read both.
Well, it's difficult for people who take the text literally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's too bad for them.
Right, right. I'm going to turn to the Vigil of Easter. We are not going to finish the Vigil of Easter because there's a lot to say. Rhoda, go ahead.
I have what's probably not a very intelligent question, but I'm still confused. Why is it called Good Friday?
It's called... not. It's a terrible day, isn't it? It's.
Yep.
If you're actually reliving the story, truly horrible things happened to Jesus, caused by people with terrible intentions, who in some ways weren't too much different from we are. Like, yes, it's a bad day. But the point is, we already know the end of the story. We don't go into any of these liturgies pretending we don't know the end of the story. And ultimately, Jesus turns the cross into something good. He survives it. He's resurrected. There's probably other people here who can speak to it just as well as I can. But the point is, this shameful death was turned around, and we know it.
Okay.
Jan, are you raising your hand? Go ahead, Jan.
They used to say when I lived in England that it came from an old English word, God's Friday, and it got corrupted into Good Friday. That was their take on it in Britain anyway.
That could be another way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
And we'll ask one of the Germans, why do you call it Karfreitag?
Krista?
Krista or Dan, do you know why it's called Karfreitag?
I always wondered, I never found out, but it's called Car Friday, and I don't really know why.
Yeah. I don't, what does the
What
word, does the word
in
car mean
German?
anything?
It doesn't sound like anything connected with a church.
Yeah.
I
What
don't know
does car mean?
In German.
if you, a car is an automobile.
Well, that's it in English, but is it that in German too?
No.
Auto.
So Dan is trying to speak, but you don't
I
appear to
don't
be
know
muted, but
what
I can hear you.
I never knew. I mean, I left Germany so many years ago. I don't know if they found out in the last 60 years what they mean, but as a child, I never knew, and I have not found out so far.
Right.
Yeah,
And
is
what-
this better, Tim?
Yes.
Okay, so what's really funny about Easter is that the verbiage is completely standalone linguistically. Gründonnerstag makes no sense actually from a linguistic standpoint. And Kar means kind of austere, but it's not used in any other linguistic context. And so even if you go back hundreds of years, because High German evolved eventually over time, but yeah, even with 5 Lutheran pastors in my family, I have no idea. Tells you what they did to me as a child, nothing.
Yeah, I'll go with car meaning sort of austere, and I'm going to go with Gründonnerstag because it's springtime, right? And you're about to celebrate the spring festival, so.
Well, it's a renewal. So the nice one is to be green means to be fresh and young, and it actually signals renewal, and that fits into the liturgical color selection.
Mm-hmm.
But that's sort of coming at this over 3 different corners, and who knows?
Yeah.
I can ask my dad tomorrow, so he might know, but that was never his sort of big thing. Not the colors and words.
The German nun Saint Hildegard of Bingen, who I think lived in the 12th century, wrote a lot of poems with music about greenness, and she was referring to both the greenness of spring, but also kind of the green renewal of all of our lives, that we have this greenness growing up within us all the time. And Gründonnerstag, I'm sure she didn't invent the term, but I think it's similar in concept.
Well, I think the last comment is Donners, it's actually just 1 letter off to Thursday, which makes it completely weird because you're moving from Donnerstag, which means Thursday, with 1 N, to Donnerstag, which means Sunday. So the other thing I suspect is that something got mangled over the centuries, and this is common that you shorten a letter, you add 1, and because it's used every year, nobody really bothered, and 500 years later, you're just confused.
Yeah, and I didn't even notice that when you typed it. I've always personally thought it meant just Green Thursday.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Sorry.
All right, I'm just gonna tantalize you with the beginning of Easter Vigil, and we're gonna cover the rest of Easter Vigil next time. So what is Easter Vigil? The word vigil implies a waiting, and the history of Easter Vigil would have been an overnight watch for Easter Day. Easter was the first of the Christian festivals to be observed on an annual basis. It was already written about in the 2nd century. So Easter has lasted forever. The ancient Easter vigils would have begun after nightfall and lasted all night until sunrise. And Lois is nodding because she goes to Orthodox Easter Vigil, or at least knows about it. And Easter vigils today start at midnight and they last for hours.
Yes, hours and hours.
So interestingly, the vigil is probably the ancestor of the sunrise service that's held in many places, because people would have been having this vigil all night long. And then when the sun came up, they'd celebrate Easter. Ultimately, people didn't want to stay up all night anymore, so they just had the sunrise part. The Easter Vigil, along with all the days of Holy Week, was retained at the time of the Reformation, but gradually over time fell into disuse. Even in the Roman Catholic Church, the vigil became a relatively unnoticed event. It was a somber service observed only by clergy or in monasteries. And its revival, like so many things, started in the 20th century with first the liturgical movement, then with Vatican II. There was local experimentation, then it showed up in the post-Vatican II Roman Catholic materials. And by the 1970s, you could find Easter Vigil in the worship books of many Protestant denominations, including in the Leaders edition of the Green Lutheran Book of Worship. It's still not super widely practiced among Lutherans, but it's spreading in popularity. Like all of you, I'm sure I never heard of Easter Vigil when I was growing up. I attended my first one, I think in the early 1990s at the Lutheran Episcopal Campus Ministry in Minnesota. But as a self-proclaimed church nerd, I absolutely loved it when I first attended it in the early 90s. This book that we're looking at now, published in 2006, includes a basic outline of the vigil in your book, but not too useful. There's so much in it that you don't get to see. I'll copy it and send it to you if you want to see it. The full service is actually here in the Leaders book. And together with Maundy Thursday and Good Friday, Easter Vigil is the central act of worship in the Christian year. When should we have vigil? We have no idea what time Christ rose from the dead. We only know that the women went to the tomb early in the morning and he wasn't there. Also remember that we are not reenacting Jesus' length of time in the womb in real time. In any case, in the Jewish tradition, days always begin at sunset, and that's actually true for us as well if we think about it. The service on Christmas Eve is 100% Christmas. The service on Easter Eve is 100% Easter. There is no need to wait for any magic hour of the day. So some people have Easter Vigil as soon as the sun sets for the sake of convenience. Some people start the vigil later and end about midnight. I know of churches that begin very early in the dark of the morning and finish the Easter Vigil at sunrise. And there are places that split the service. So they'll do part of the service on Saturday evening, and then they'll regather for Holy Communion on Easter Sunday morning. The splitting in half kind of tends to take away from it as a unified event, but Easter Vigil can happen anytime between sunset Saturday and Sunday. Some churches have
Is
other.
there
Go ahead.
any mention of marshmallows? That offends me.
There is nothing in the hymnal about marshmallows. It's
I don't like it.
I know. So what Lois is referring to, most of you know, Pastor Matt in his announcements about our Easter Vigil always highlights the fact that we're going to have marshmallows at the end of it around the fire. We light a fire anyway. We've got a campfire going outside. That is part of the liturgy. When it's all over, we eat marshmallows. The marshmallows are not connected. We definitely agree that by the time the service is over, it's Easter and it's a good time for a party. But it's not the main reason we should go to Easter Vigil. We've reached 8 o'clock, so I'm actually going to stop now that we have excited everyone with images of campfires and marshmallows. And in 2 weeks' time, we'll talk about what really happens between the campfire and the marshmallows. Anything else anybody would like to jump in with before we head out for tonight?
Thanks, Tim. You're great.
Thank you. Joan, you have something?
Thank you.
I just wanted to say, I think that Holy Week, Easter, there's always a push. I know it's probably as draining as Christmas to clergy and musicians. But there's always this sort of creativity about, oh, are we going to do a sunrise service and then breakfast on the lawn and then have a regular service? And are we going to do a vigil? And when are we going to eat? And I find it this string of days very overwhelming. But staff don't get to choose. So sometimes I feel sorry for them.
It's a lot. It's taxing both in terms of time and honestly, the services are very emotionally draining. Like I've done enough of them for enough years now that they don't wear me out. Easter Sunday morning wears me out, but Thursday, Friday, and Saturday don't wear me out, but they are emotionally challenging. And there is always, some attempt to keep them interesting within the context of what the book tells us to do. We also want them to be more than just the reading of texts, the reading of words. So there is a lot of thinking all the time about what exactly they're going to look like. And you'll notice, especially once we get into Easter Vigil, there's so many different ways to look at Easter Vigil. So, yeah.
I think things that disrupt our expectations are powerful. And I have been at the sunrise service above Stanford where the cows walk by. And it sounds silly, but you wake up to nature in a different way, and then the service becomes more powerful.
Yeah. Final comments?
Thank you
so much, everybody, for being here. Mom, you're unmuting. Got something to say?
Nope, I just was gonna say, thanks, goodbye.
Thanks for coming. It's so exciting
Nice
to see you.
to meet you, Mom.
Yeah,
Nice to meet
my
you.
pleasure to be here.
I
Bye-bye.
believe it's March
like to
11th, the next time we're on. I'll see you then.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again for picking the song for Sunday, Tim. It was
You're
beautiful.
welcome.
I hope everyone else enjoyed it.
I did.
Go good. It was beautiful. That piano, that arrangement was gorgeous.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it was fun
Loved
to
it.
play too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right. See you all.
Bye-bye.
I have a wall question for you, Tim.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was sitting there listening to I guess it was the first lesson about the Noah's Ark.
Yeah.
And suddenly I thought, there was that piece of music. There was like that opera about the rainbow, and it was some modern composer and
Benjamin Britten, Noah's Flood.
dressed up like a bunch of kids dressed up like animals. And I really had to think about it. I'd forgotten all about it. And then I tried to look it up, and I thought, no, it doesn't just say Noah's Flood. It's some old English thing.
Yeah, Noah's Flood by Benjamin Britten.
What happened to Noah's Flood? I saw a couple of spectacular productions, one over at Stanford and one at the big Methodist church after it opened, downtown.
I've never seen it. I would love to see it.
And
it's the kind of thing that
well, then I looked it up. I found Britain and that, but it was only written in 1958.
Yeah, it's a 20th century piece, but it's the kind of thing that Philharmonia would do, because it's in a Baroque pattern, even though it's not Baroque music. So I wouldn't put it past Philharmonia to put it on sometime.
Yeah, but anyway, suddenly I thought about that. It's something I hadn't thought about for a long time.
That's right.
But I suppose in the 60s it was popular because it was, it had only been written, a few years before. But they were wonderful. Both of the ones I saw, especially the Stanford one.
If you ever see that anybody's putting it on, make sure that you tell me about it, because I want to go.
Yeah, I'd like to see that again.
Cool.
And here this Bible verse popped up, and I thought, whoa, there's that opera about this.
That's right. That's right. Jan?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Jan.
Okay, good night, everybody.
School in England put on Noah's Flood, and they were permitted to do it in the community's White Rose Theater downtown, and it was really very, very good, because when they put on a music thing like that from that high school, the musicians were mixed up with, they were teachers, they were parents, and they were students all together putting on this production on the stage. It was really quite wonderful.
Neat. Super cool.
Yeah.
I'll look for it. See if we can find it. Not now, but hopefully in the next year, people will start playing music for other people again.
That would be good.
Yep, absolutely. Okay,
I
good night. all.
gotta go.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye, people.